Right there. This week's story is in the townland of Ruban, just down the road from where I live. And in 1926, in this field, just around the spot where I am standing, there was an archaeological dig and a find here in this field. So I'm going to speak to the owner of the field and to John Martin, who has historical interests in that kind of situation.
Well, this will tell me if any leaks in my willies, anyway.
You'll find out soon enough. I'll pull this gate in case these cattle get away.
Yep, sure.
That'll do. Plenty of gutters now.
Aye. There you go. Well, the farmer at that time, I think what he was trying to do was get rid of some stony bits on the top of a wee rounded raised bit in the field. And when he was doing that, he found a big flat stone. And it turned out that that big flat stone was actually the top of a grave. And underneath the flat stone, there was a stone-lined box, if you like, and that was the actual grave. And they call that a kist. And inside the kist, he found a wee pot. And that pot is the one which ended up in the Ulster Museum. Right now, that would have been 1926 when the farmer found that, and about 7 or 8 years later, there was a local archaeologist, an amateur archaeologist called Maisie Gaffigan, brilliant lady, super lady, and she wrote it up for a journal called The Antiquarian. Now, I saw that pot in the Ulster Museum, and they let me examine it, measure it, and what I did then was I made a replica of it, and the pot that I brought along to show you was the replica, and now you have a replica of your own.
Right, John, we're standing here in the field here where this was found. Is there a reason why it was found here, why it was buried here?
Why was it buried in this field and not the next field?
Aye, and this place,
well,
for example.
In the Bronze Age, which is the period we're talking about for this type of burial, very often, in fact usually, graves of this sort would have been on a slightly raised bit of ground, which we're on now, and that slightly raised bit of ground was usually only a matter of yards away from a watercourse. Now the watercourse could be a small river, it could be a lake, or it could be a shach even, you know. So I think that's why they chose this area. And you've got everything here. You've got this slight rise in your field, and you've got the wee river running along the bottom of the field, which is only, what, 50 yards away?
About that.
Yeah.
And what's the connection with the watercourse and the burial sites? Is there a reason?
Now, I could
Does anybody know that?
I could give you all sorts of answers, and each one
just the way it was done.
Each one would have been as true as the other. All we can say is that's the way that they're usually found.
Yeah.
As to why they did it, nobody knows.
So you talked about Bronze Age?
The Bronze Age, yeah. So that's, this is a typical Bronze Age pot found in burials at that time. And it wasn't that, it's not usually a type of pot which was found in settlement areas. So the theory is that these pots, this type of pot, was made specifically as a burial good, as part of the ritual, if you like, of burying, and also the choice of where the burial is again thought to be part of all that ritual of burial at that time.
Aye.
So these were called food vessels, but nobody knows whether they. One idea is that they were for putting food in, so that in the afterlife, the buried person would have something to eat on the way, if you like. You know,
I was going
like
to say
a packed lunch.
I was going to say you wouldn't need much food in the grave now. I was going to ask why eat it, but anyway. So there could have been food in it at that time.
Well, they could, but there's not any good scientific evidence that there was food in it. Sometimes you can analyse what's the remains inside the pot, and sometimes they'll find fat, especially from sheep fat inside them. But they also found fat coming from milk products as well in some of them. Now, whether that is from the food that was left in them, or whether that was part of the preparation of the pot, if you like, nobody really knows.
Well, you're going back a long time, Bronze Age, so I suppose a lot of time has passed
Well,
since then. And
that's 2000 BC,
yeah,
so 4,000 years ago.
it's a long time.
So it's waited 4,000 years to be found. Now this isn't the original. This is a replica that I have made,
Yeah,
and that's
mine, hey.
that's yours now.
Oh, I'll keep that up in the cabinet in the house. Sure.
Well, you can have your porridge out of it.
I could do that now. Yeah. That's fascinating, John, to be honest. It definitely is, to think that there was boys running about this wee field of ours here 4,000 years ago. Getting up to all sorts, I'm sure.
You say 4,000 years ago, there were people here probably 2,000 years before that, in the Neolithic period, in the Stone Age.
Yeah.
Because there have been people farming in Ireland for at least 6,000 years.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
You've got a long tradition to live up to.
Yeah. Very good. Well, John, I'm standing here holding this wee bowl you presented me, and thank you very much, by the way.
You're welcome.
I'll cherish it now, put it in the house here, and it'd be nice to have one and keep it within the farmhouse, where it was found, and it's great, I'm just looking at it here. There's a bit of care and attention went into making this thing. A lot of indentations and decor in it and whatnot. Could you explain just a bit about what the theory is about making them and how they went about it and why?
Well, these weren't made on a wheel. They were handmade, like a pinch pot.
Right.
And they probably would have started off and made the bottom half of that as a pinch pot and then added coils on top of that until they moulded it up into the desired shape. And then they would have thinned it out inside. And one of the things that they used to use to thin them out was a seashell. They'd scrape it out inside with the seashell, and that would give a nice rounded flat surface inside. But in this particular pot from Raban, they've used the seashell to actually decorate it on the outside. And those round marks there.
Mm-hmm.
The seashell has been pressed into the clay, not when it's wet, but when it's drying, so it's firm enough to actually hold the impression, so you don't actually destroy the pot by pressing too hard. So they wait until the clay dries a wee bit and then press it into it. So that's called impressed decoration. So you've got the roundels here caused by the seashell impressions, and then up the top you've got a different type of thing. You see just on the rim there,
mm-hmm.
those wee lines of dots. Yeah. Those are called comb impressions.
Mm-hmm.
And now it wasn't really a comb per se. It would have been more like a rounded, narrow piece of maybe bone or maybe stone, which had little notches carved in it, and they would have just rolled that over it, and that made those little round impressions. And then these impressions here in that zone there were made probably by a carved end of a bit of stick or a bit of bone. Now what you were doing there, pressing your thumbnail into it, I've seen that described, or seen these described as nail impressions, and I've tried many times to use my own nail, and it looks nothing like that.
Right.
Nothing like that at all. So, and then you've got between the two roundel zones, you've got this layer here, and you see that sort of zigzag pattern.
Wiggly line.
Yeah, well, that's called a false relief, or a running chevron of false relief pattern. And that is very, very common, especially in Irish pots. Now that type of food vessel, as we call it, is known as an Irish bowl, and it's almost unique to Ireland. You'll also see it in Scottish bowls. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different type of tools being used to make the patterns on this to decorate the pot.
Mm-hmm.
So these are called different zones, and dividing up the Irish bowl into these zones and then putting all these impressions and decorations right over the whole of the bowl really gives it its character. And people say to you, well, why did they do that?
Certainly took a lot of pride on it now. They certainly took a lot of pride on it.
Well, yes, pride, but they may have had more significance than that. And I often compare it to the way somebody would be buried these days.
Yeah.
You might have somebody buried in their yacht or the yacht club blazer, with a regimental tie and a kilt.
Yeah.
And that would tell you that dead man what his social standing was, what his military prowess was, and also a little bit about his kinfolk from his kilt, you know. So these patterns may have had that sort of symbolic thing. It may have told you about the individual that was in the grave.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is only just my interpretation.
So John, have you done many of these bowls or what?
Well, my wife says I make far too many. But I started about 8 years ago, and I've now got. I started off with the idea that we'd do some from every county in Ireland, and then I just sort of thought, well, let's stick to 9 counties of Ulster. So that's what I've concentrated on, and I've now done about 200 from the 9 counties of Ulster.
And you told me you were retired. You're far from retired. Eh?
It's the best job I ever had. So what I try and do nowadays is I take the pots that I've made, the replicas, and I try and find out exactly where they're found. And sometimes you can actually pinpoint it to, you know, within a square yard. And then I'll take the pot along there and I'll photograph it where it was found. And if I'm really lucky, I can find somebody like yourself who is living and working on the land now, and I'll get them to pose with the pot for the photograph. And I call this wee project People, Pots and Places.
Very good. Gotcha.
Well, it's in a way what I'm trying to do is form some sort of a connection and between the farmers now and the farmers then, the Bronze Age and the Neolithic farmers that were there 6,000 years ago and 4,000 years ago, because they would have had very similar goals, if you like, you know, and to some extent they would have had the similar sort of livestock and similar crops that we would have nowadays.
Right. Aye, cattle farming and stuff.
Cattle farming was very big, especially in the late Neolithic and through the Bronze Age. But, you know, the crops, I mean, what crops do you grow?
Well, we grow mainly barley, wheat, oats, beans,
Well,
grass obviously as well.
I don't know that we've found much in the way of evidence of beans, but certainly the grain crops, you know, especially barley, they would have grown a lot of barley right from the Bronze Age right on through, you know. So the fact that you are sort of carrying on farming and with the same goals that they had, it makes a nice connection. And then if I can have a connection between that and the actual site where the pots were found, I think it gives people sometimes it gives them a better knowledge, but it certainly can foster a relationship, if you like, a connection with the people who came before them many generations ago.
Yeah, still farming the same land and.
Yep, looking after the land, you know, in much the same way that the Bronze Age and the Neolithic people would have. Sort of custodians, if you like.
And there's a lot of people's passed through this land, I'm sure, not 4,000 years.
Well, if you say a generation is about 25 years, I can't do the sums in the top of my head, but it's hundreds of generations. And you know, I just wonder if the people who buried that person in the kiss grave here, if they were to walk down from the road here today and into this field, would they be able to recognise it? And I think they probably would.
Interesting. Certainly interesting stuff. So beef cattle and cereal crops, grass, hasn't changed a whole lot, has it?
No, I suppose the big thing is that you haven't been burying very many people in your fields.
Well, no, I have not. No. Practices might have changed a wee bit, obviously, the way things.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, obviously the plough. They would have had the plough, but the ploughs would have been pulled by oxen, or later on by horses. You know. And it was really the Industrial Revolution, whenever industrial machinery came in, you know, mechanised machinery, if you like, came into farming in Ireland, that's when the really big changes have happened. Field boundaries being taken out, and you know, making it more manageable for modern farming techniques. but still your goals are the same. You're producing food, and you're using the same species that they would have done.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting stuff. Thank you very much. You're full of knowledge.
No, full of questions, that's all.
Full of questions,